Yo, shalom.
Shalom, y'all.
Yo, sorry for the inconvenience tonight. We was put on the spot.
Yeah, but praise Yah, we found out about it when we did, because if not, it would
Yeah,
really.
like YouTube just gave us notice literally like 30 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I had to switch and adjust everything over there. But thankfully, praise God, we had the second channel,
Right.
The Yoshi Vibe channel, which I'm glad everything's set up because last time we got banned, I knew we needed a backup plan. So,
Right.
So we got banned again. So the next 3 shows will probably be on this channel. So if you haven't already, definitely go ahead and subscribe to the channel.
Mm-hmm.
This is our music channel. Hit the notification bell. So, because we submitted our claim to YouTube, but it'll probably take about 10 business days, like you did last time. So we just prepare for it.
Because the whole thing is the robot that.
It's the automation. And we did shows about this, man. It's automation stuff, man. And,
Right.
Because everything we do is under fair use, and we dealt with a couple of fair use things earlier this week, and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, I get tagged again with another email 30 minutes ago. So,
Right.
But fortunately, we was able to switch everything over fairly quickly, and so we can have tonight's show. Because we don't want to do tonight's show. I mean, tonight's show is going to be really interesting.
Seriously.
Yeah, so backing off the politics a little bit, and current politics anyway, and digging a little bit into Cuban history, and. I just thought we love history and we love a good story.
Yeah.
And we discussed this before in the past, but we just wanted to find more information, and we did. So, so you already here, hit the subscribe button, like button, and share, and let everybody know, because black channels have been getting shadow banned for the past couple of months now.
Right.
And it was just our turn to get tagged, basically.
Yeah.
But it was all good. We have a backup plan in place.
Praise Yah, seriously.
Seriously. And so tonight, Fidel Castro, dictator of Cuba, and how the CIA tried to kill this man over 600 times and failed.
What's really interesting about the story of Castro and all these times they tried to assassinate him, whether Castro was a very controversial figure, so whether you agree with him or not, it's one of those things where he was doing his business in his country.
Yeah.
But because the United States saw him as a threat, you saw how many cartoonish attempts they made at his life.
Yeah.
And they felt completely justified. But another thing too is they never told anybody that they were doing these things.
They were very sneaky about it.
Yeah, it was one of those things where if they because when I actually went in the Wikipedia article to look up all the attempts on Castro's life, it was one of those things where at the time the CIA would not admit that they were actually killing or had plans to kill various world leaders in order to topple their governments, in order to basically manipulate their political structure. They would not disclose that.
The same thing that we accuse Russia of doing.
Right.
Basically.
It's what they've been doing since Kennedy.
You're right, yeah. And that what America specializes in, is destabilizing governments.
Right.
And it's funny because, they do it in plain sight. I remember watching Black Panther, and one of those Killmonger monologues, he mentioned that too.
Right.
Killmonger, I think too many of us related. They humanize him too much as a bad guy, from one.
Right.
But this guy was an American soldier. He went to MIT, and
Right.
America trained him who he was. And you think about what also the Killmonger did in the movie, he destabilized Wakanda.
Exactly. Right.
That was his whole goal. They destabilize from within.
And then take it over.
And they take over.
And then put in their own figurehead.
Which that's pro them.
Right, and play puppet.
Right. And and like I said, happened since Kennedy. America did it again with Saddam Hussein.
Right.
They put him in there. And when he saw bugging the system, they took him out.
Right.
Osama bin Laden.
Exactly. With the Taliban.
Yeah,
What was the Taliban? Al Qaeda. It was Al Qaeda.
Yeah. So hell, who knows these days? Because as soon as you see things start spreading around, all of a sudden there was no terrorist attacks.
Yeah, they're afraid of catching it.
Yeah,
So all the terrorists are on quarantine.
Yeah, so it lets you know the America had their hands in everything. So we're not going to go. We are going to go into the many ways they try to kill Castro, but we're going to start off to why they started going after him the way they did. Because things that happened before that America just wouldn't let up and leave that man alone. So we're going to get into it. Sorry here. Yeah. Right.
The Cuban Revolution saw Batista removed from power by Fidel Castro, but Castro initially just became head of the army. As agreed by the revolutionaries, Manuel Urrutia Leo, a liberal anti-Batista activist, became the next president, and Jose Miro Cardona, another liberal, became prime minister. Miro, however, quickly resigned, and Castro became prime minister, and conducted a tour of many nations in the Americas, including the USA in 1959. However, although he was not necessarily a communist himself at this point, he began appointing communists like Che Guevara into cabinet positions, angering President Urrutia. So the two men fell out, and Castro resigned as prime minister in July 1959, prompting thousands of his supporters to demand Urrutia to resign. He did, and Castro became prime minister once again, and largely ran the country, while Osvaldo Dorticos Torradillo, a communist, became president. Now in power, Castro began to introduce a wide range of policies and schemes, like building many schools, houses and hospitals. But he also nationalized many businesses and seized land from American companies, angering the US government and also powerful organizations like the Mafia and the United Fruit Company, which had a great deal of political influence in Central America. And Castro also began...
And it's interesting because, of course, with any man-made regime, you're going to have your faults. Mm-hmm. But people often make it seem like Castro just took advantage of his people. But you see, that's the guys that America used in order to attack him, because they were really upset that he was going after the American companies.
It's like you said, about who control the narrative, and then so America always try to prop itself up as the good guy,
right?
And we already know how evil America is. So, like, yeah, we see how you treat black people, but yes, for some reason you care about the liberation of Cuba,
right?
The liberation of Cuba, rather.
Began executing political opponents, banning political parties, and censoring the press. So many joined the ongoing Escambray rebellion, which was made up of Batista supporters and some of Castro's old allies who were angered by his undemocratic policies. They conducted sabotage raids from their mountain base and quickly found new allies in America and the Dominican Republic. Then finally Eisenhower accused Castro of being a communist and ordered the CIA remove him from power. The CIA had success in overthrowing leaders like in Guatemala in 1954, but their sabotage raids and assassination attempts in Cuba failed. And so too did their embargo on Cuban sugar, which began when Castro nationalized oil companies in Cuba in order to refine Soviet oil. And relations got worse when a vessel carrying Belgian weapons exploded in Havana's port in March 1960. Castro had been importing weapons to expand his army and fight the rebels, and he blamed America for this explosion. And at a UN meeting in New York, Castro met with the Soviet leader Khrushchev and people like Malcolm X. So, now believing that Cuba was ready to become an ally of the Soviet Union, Eisenhower approved a plan of an invasion of the island. But hoping to hide their involvement in this invasion, the Americans recruited men from the large Cuban population in Florida, which had fled from political persecution. Around 1,500 of these men were trained by the CIA throughout 1960, and the Americans acquired planes and ships that could not be traced back to them. They hoped this force made up entirely of Cubans would prevent the Soviets from getting involved, and believed it would encourage anti-Castro rebellions. However, in 1960 there was an election in the United States.
And it's interesting because you see how America tried to, they tried to attack Castro but keep their hands as clean as possible.
Because they were scared of the Soviet.
Exactly.
States, and both candidates, Kennedy and Nixon, campaigned on being tougher on Cuba and communist nations. Kennedy won this election and quickly proved the invasion plan. In March 1961, former Cuban Prime Minister Miro was made head of the Cuban Revolutionary Committee, while the army was transferred to Nicaragua ready to launch their invasion. In mid-April, their bombers tried to destroy the Cuban Air Force, but Cuban intelligence had found out about the invasion ahead of time, and these bombings had little effect. So on the 16th of April, a small force was sent to Bahia Honda as a diversion, while the rest of the army was sent to the Bay of Pigs on the 17th. But they came under immediate fire, and the Cuban Air Force was able to destroy most of the ships carrying medical supplies and ammunition. Plus, the Bay of Pigs proved to be a poor landing site. Initially, the CIA planned to land in Trinidad, which had a better port and was closer to the rebels in the Escambray Mountains, where they could escape and join the ongoing rebellion should the invasion fail. The Bay of Pigs, however, was surrounded by swamps and a radio station which allowed Castro to be alerted and mobilize his army. 25,000 Cuban soldiers then descended upon the now poorly equipped invaders and defeated them within a couple of days. Most of the exiles were captured, and the Americans could not, as hoped, hide their involvement in this invasion. So, suffering a major knock to his prestige, Kennedy continued to try and assassinate or oust Castro through Operation Mongoose, but this too proved to be ineffective. Castro, on the other hand, began to become more dependent on the Soviets for defense, and this would eventually lead to nuclear weapons being placed on the island and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Alright, so basically, and we're going to go into that. We're going to go into the whole the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
So it really started from the invasion from the U.S. and how they failed.
Yeah.
And so that's what they try to. They're like, F it, you can't hit them directly, so we're going to try to send agents in here.
And it's interesting because I mean, you look at the Kennedy presidency, and they bring up a lot of different good things that he did. But as far as civil rights and all this, that, and the third. But then you look at it's interesting. At that time, the Bay of Pigs was big news. Yeah. That was a huge failure and a huge stain on his reputation.
Yeah, they was embarrassed by that.
Right.
I mean, America would be the all-powerful country, and they would catch an L.
Not only were they embarrassed, they were outed.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to be sneaky about it. They didn't want to have Soviet Russia find out that, you guys are involved with Cuba.
Yeah.
Trying to attack Cuba.
Yeah, so now you got to hop in this thing. So yeah, here's more details on Bay of Pigs.
The CIA began to plan the assassination of Fidel and Raul and Che, whatever leadership they could get, but especially Fidel, so as to demoralize the Cuban people and make the Bay of Pigs invasion more likely to be successful.
In 1961, John Kennedy inherited the invasion plans from Eisenhower. He allowed it to go ahead, but vetoed the use of U.S. combat forces. As preliminary acts leading to the invasion, saboteurs burned thousands of acres of sugarcane, and the La Coubre, a Belgian freighter carrying arms, was blown up at a Havana dock. A second bomb was timed to explode as volunteers reached the burning ship to help the victims. Over 100 people were killed and hundreds more wounded.
So you see how the U.S. burned down their sugarcane.
Moreover, exiled Cuban pilots flying American planes painted with Cuban insignia bombed 2 airports, killing a number of civilians. Again, Fidel called on the Cuban people. On April 16, 1961, in a dramatic speech following the funeral of those who had been killed, he made one of the most important declarations in Cuban history.
Primero que empieza a preguntar, ¿están de acuerdo con la reforma urbana? Y entonces los de adelante se ven todos levantando el rifle y todo el pueblo atrás, ¿no? Y entonces sí, todo el mundo levanta. ¿Están de acuerdo con la reforma urbana? ¿Están de acuerdo con la reforma de la enseñanza? ¿Están de acuerdo, con toda la revolución que se ha hecho en la enseñanza, en la salud? Sí, sí, sí. Entonces dice, esto que hemos hecho se llama socialismo.
Y que esa revolución socialista la defendemos con esos fusiles.
Fidel dirigió personalmente las operaciones y rechazaba la petición de nosotros que se pusiera a un mayor resguardo, a una mayor distancia del frente de combate.
The Bay of Pigs invasion, which was launched from Nicaragua, ended.
This kind of shows me his passion for his country, because how often, you never see an American president go to the front lines.
Right, exactly.
In disaster. The forces directed by the United States met with intense, unexpected Cuban resistance, and the battle ended in 72 hours.
Castro was there, but Kennedy wasn't there.
Right.
The captured Cuban exiles were later exchanged for baby food and medicine. In the mountainous regions, opposition groups financed by the CIA formed pockets of resistance against the revolution, but they were eventually overcome. The overt war against the country became a covert war against the man.
So,
Man, it's just so interesting because, at first, they were attacking Cuba.
Right.
The country, they were bombing the citizens. They were trying to kill their morale. And then you see how the script flipped and became about Fidel Castro and him treating his people bad.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you had to change the narrative though. You had to demonize them to justify your actions.
Right.
And then you saw that they sent planes. It was American planes that put the Cuban flag on them.
Right.
And but they caused a confusion, which we got to find out in this next video here. And we'll break down everything that went wrong and how the American lost that invasion in 3 days. Like he said, 72 hours, he was able to back off the U.S. And that's a lot of firepower to back off. And he did it without the Russians' help.
Right. And he was on the front line.
In April of 1962, anti-Castro Cuban exiles staged an invasion at Cuba's Bay of Pigs. The CIA, who was behind the 3-day operation, would come to consider it one of the most colossal blunders in their entire history. How bad did it go? Well, let's just say that Che Guevara himself is reputed to have thanked an American government official for enabling it. Today we're going to recount some of the most insane facts about the Bay of Pigs invasion. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, be a good patsy by leaving a comment and letting us know what intelligence operations you would like to hear more about. Okay, now we go to Cuba. In 1973, E. Howard Hunt stood before a Senate committee investigating the Watergate break-in and said, "I cannot escape the feeling that the country is punishing me for doing the very things it trained and directed me to do." What Hunt didn't say was that those things included some seriously shady stuff. Hunt joined the CIA in 1949 and quickly rose through the ranks. In 1954, he helped overthrow the Arbenz regime in Mexico. By 1960, he was helping recruit Cuban exiles willing to serve in a provisional government set up to take control of the government after the defeat of Castro. This would lead directly to Hunt's eventual involvement in the Bay of Pigs. Though he wouldn't officially resign until 1970, Hunt's career with the CIA was effectively over after the failed invasion. He would quickly fall in with the players in the Nixon White House and became a key figure in the Watergate scandal. Seeking to give themselves plausible deniability as to involvement in the invasion, the CIA sought to launch the invasion from Nicaragua. To this end, they approached President and de facto dictator of the country, Luis Somoza. Nervous that he would face repercussions at the hands of international entities like the United Nations, he was reluctant. Determined to get their way, the CIA eventually bribed Somoza into agreeing for the tidy sum of $10 million. Similarly, the CIA had helped quash an attempted coup in Guatemala against pro-U.S. government. They held a great deal of influence there and used the country as a staging grounds for the operation. The American planes that came to support the ground troops during the invasion had been disguised as Cuban planes. This is so the Cubans wouldn't shoot them down. Unfortunately, the invasion force was so disorganized and ill-informed that they thought the American planes were actual Cuban planes and shot at their own air support.
That was so damn dumb.
Right.
That was so damn dumb.
Man, they ended up shooting each other.
That's what they get. Try to be sneaky, man, about it. You know. Yeah, I mean, you look exactly like Cuban plane. How would they know? Yeah, no distinguishing factors.
I mean, they couldn't draw a yellow line by the flag or something like that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's difficult to start a revolution without the support of the locals. The CIA, though their director denied it, was relying on a popular uprising to break out against Castro as part of their plan. They even convinced the U.S. military that such a revolt was likely in the wake of an invasion. Unfortunately, the Bay of Pigs was in a geographically remote area with a low population. Without a wide-ranging propaganda campaign to spread the word, most Cubans would have no way to find out an invasion had even occurred. That campaign never came. Complicating matters even further, Castro had thousands of political dissidents arrested mere days before the invasion. With those fighters out of the picture, the chances of an insurrection fell precipitously. Even worse, the timing of the arrest suggested Castro knew the invasion was coming days in advance. It has been suggested by some that the only way to explain the spectacular failure of the Bay of Pigs is to assume failure was what the CIA wanted all along. But why would the CIA want the invasion to fail? Well, the agents in command of the operation didn't believe Castro could be overthrown without a full-scale U.S. invasion. This theory holds that the agency sought to manipulate President Kennedy into ordering that larger invasion by arranging for the smaller invasion force of exiles to fail sooner rather than later. After the invasion failed, President Kennedy ordered a military review of the operation to figure out what had gone so wrong. That report, which would remain classified for decades, concluded that both Cuba and the USSR knew of the invasion plan long before it occurred. In fact, the review determined that the communists knew of the plan before the rank-and-file members of the invasion force did. This implies that someone higher up in the chain of command must have leaked the information. The report further concluded that Allen Dulles, then head of the CIA, knew that the Cubans and Russians knew of the plan, but let it go ahead anyway. This is often cited as further evidence that the agency wanted the invasion to fail.
Porque lo que no pueden perdonarnos los imperialistas es que estemos aquí y que hayamos hecho una revolución socialista en las propias narices de los Estados Unidos.
On April 15, 1961, the CIA sent several B-26 bombers to raid Cuban airfields with the intent of dealing a blow to Castro's Air Force. Painted to look like Cuban military planes, the aircraft eventually landed in Key West, Florida. Their pilots presented themselves as defectors who stole the planes of their own accord and flew them during the attacks. Of course, as we've already established, Castro knew the invasion was coming. To protect his aircraft, he had them scattered throughout the country. The vast majority of the planes were unharmed, and the damage was minimal. This failure meant that Castro would be able to attack planes providing air cover for the invasion force. Alarmed by such a possibility, the Kennedy administration refused to provide any such air support.
Will not be under any conditions be an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces. And this government will do everything it possibly can, and I think it can meet its responsibilities to make sure that there are no Americans involved in any actions inside Cuba.
Both American military personnel and civilians were involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the CIA spent decades trying to cover up their deaths. Take the story of Thomas Pete Ray. He was a member of the Alabama Air National Guard, and he specialized in flying the same B-26s that Castro's Air Force mainly used. The CIA needed pilots like Ray, so he was recruited along with several of his fellow guardsmen and sent to a staging ground in Nicaragua to prepare. By April 19, 1961, the invasion was in dire straits. Ray and his fellow pilots were told they could help the invasion force by attacking sites near the Bay of Pigs, but if they were captured or killed, they would be disavowed as mercenaries. They went anyway. While conducting a strafing run near the invasion landing site, Ray was shot down. Miraculously, both he and his flight engineer, a man named Leo Baker, survived the crash. However, they were quickly caught and killed by the Cuban militia. Baker was buried in a Cuban cemetery. Ray, who was Caucasian and whose presence supported the notion of American involvement in the invasion, was embalmed and placed in a freezer until 1979. His remains were eventually returned to his daughter. The families of both men were told their fates, but also told to keep the information secret. It wouldn't be until 1988 that the CIA would finally acknowledge their connection to Ray and his fellow lost airmen. All of them would receive the Distinguished Intelligence Cross, which is the highest award the CIA can bestow. The Bay of Pigs has been re-examined repeatedly over the decades since it occurred. One of the interesting facts that has been uncovered is that several units of U.S. Marines were apparently in the general vicinity of the invasion site. Some analysts have suggested that this Marine presence was part of the CIA's plan to draw Kennedy into a larger invasion. If that was the case, it didn't work. When the administration refused air support for the operation, they also told the Marines to stand down. One Marine who was part of that force recalled that explosions were already going off in the distance when they received that order. The Marines didn't have the numbers to repel the 60,000 Cuban troops that they would have faced. It's likely that if Kennedy hadn't held them out of the Bay of Pigs, many of them would have been captured or killed. The buck stops with the president, and John F. Kennedy decided to take public responsibility for the Bay of Pigs invasion and its failure. Behind the scenes, though, Kennedy blamed the CIA and felt they had misled him about the mission. He also felt that they were doing their best to wash their hands of the disaster. A few months later, Allen Dulles and several other ranking members of the CIA were dismissed or allowed to resign. Dulles's role in the Bay of Pigs remains mysterious. Many accounts hold that he was fully aware of and in control of the situation, but more recent reports have suggested that Dulles may have been deteriorating mentally during the planning stages. In an unusual move, he had delegated the tasks of organizing the invasion and keeping the White House informed to a subordinate. He is also alleged to have missed important meetings and displayed odd and eccentric behavior in the course of his duties. With the Cubans having advanced notice of the invasion, the U.S. Marines being held out of the battle, and the lack of air support, you'd think the Cuban exiles would have been slaughtered. Yet only 118 members of the anti-Castro Cuban invasion force died during the Bay of Pigs. This seems especially incredible when you take into account that the Cubans, with home field advantage and vastly superior numbers, lost 176 members of the military and an estimated 500 to 4,000 militiamen. Still, nearly 1,200 anti-Castro fighters were captured. After the invasion, Castro found himself with over 1,000 American prisoners. In exchange for their safe return, he demanded expensive industrial machinery and tens of millions of dollars. However, he eventually settled for $53 million worth of food and medical supplies. All of this was provided by private companies. The U.S. government, who still maintained they weren't involved in the invasion, had no official role. The first prisoners returned were 60 seriously injured men who were released in exchange for a payment of $2.5 million. This was quickly followed by a mass release which included almost all of the remaining members of the invasion force. These prisoners were returned to Miami.
It's like he cashed in. He's like, yo, I got 1,000 of these Americans. I'm gonna make some money off of them.
You know he took advantage of that.
Yeah, like you talk about 2.5 million back in that time, so it was a lot more.
And you know they weren't in a rush to let him go because I mean they tried to topple his country.
Yeah, you know, and then and you know they had white prisoners too, so you know they had to get them back.
Seriously.
Where they were greeted by over 10,000 supporters. However, one Bay of Pigs exile would remain in a Cuban prison until 1986 before being released and returned. The real reasons behind his quarter-century of detention were never explained by the Cuban government and remain a mystery to this very day. No matter how you slice it, the Bay of Pigs was a complete disaster. It embarrassed the United States and emboldened their enemies, bringing the world closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. The Cold War lasted for decades, and while it did eventually come to an end, it's hard not to wonder what history would look like if the Bay of Pigs invasion hadn't been such a half-assed show. Do you?
Man, it seemed like everybody and their mom would drop the ball.
Yeah.
Pigs.
But you know, it's amazing because you think that this most powerful nation in the free world, like, you know, it'd be a lot more organized, but it just show you, man, the people don't know what the hell they be doing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Seriously.
And I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it was overconfident.
Yeah.
Arrogance. You know what I mean? Looking down upon the Cubans.
Right.
And
think that they were just gonna be toppled over.
Yeah,
easily.
thought it would be easy pickings.
Right.
And for him to have somebody have intelligence, and the U.S. ranks so far up that the soldiers didn't even know about the invasion.
Right.
You know, like I wonder who he had in his back pocket. You know, but Americans probably never thought they had intelligence that deep into it.
Man, connections, man.
Yeah, they said Cuba and the Russians knew about the invasion, so they ain't sweating it. So they had 60,000 soldiers ready to go.
Man,
you know?
but you never know, especially with Russia on Cuba's side. You know, the Russians have a lot of connections in the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, they know for how they KGB. This is infamous as the CIA.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
as far as spies and everything. So who knows how deep it goes, even now.
Like we'll even see later on with the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a Russian official and a U.S. official that made deals behind closed doors in order to make sure that everything went smooth.
Yeah.
So you never know what happens behind various closed doors.
Yeah, you never know. All right, this next video is how one of the many ways to try to kill Fidel Castro.
One thing that I want to bring up before we even get into the milkshake thing, because Castro had a thing for milk. You know, it's a really odd fact, but you know, he had a thing for milk, which and he even had a cow, and I forgot what kind of special honor the cow got, but I mean the cow was basically like a national treasure, and its name was Ubre Blanco, which means white udder.
Well, you said that's his personal cow?
Yeah, and it would just make
anything that he wanted.
He said it made like the best milk. He was obsessed with this cow.
Wow. I mean, I know he gets hot in Cuba, but you know,
man, ice cream.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like the man loved ice cream, everything milk. You
know, but some cultures, they're heavy on dairy. I know they say that in India, you know, it's very dairy heavy too. And then I want to say Iran as well.
Right.
You know, I've been watching food shows that all over the world and watching their diets, man. So I thought it interesting because I know for me, I can't mess with milk like that, bro.
Yeah.
I mean, I mess with some almond milk in a minute, but cow milk, that going the wrong way.
I'm not even sure if it was the Cuban people. It was just Castro, man.
Yeah, Castro was deep into it.
Yeah,
because even though I was in Cuba, I don't remember coming across that many
milk meals, man. I mean, Cuban food.
Couple ice cream stands, but food. No,
man, Cuban food is basically, man, it's Caribbean food.
Yeah,
it's Caribbean food with a Spanish name on it. So. You know, everybody is just interested in the weird quirks that these different officials have.
Yeah, well, I guess the dairy is the most sadistic form of animal abuse. I want to know who the first person thought, like, you know what, I want to drink some milk from this udder.
Like, man,
because somebody had to try it first. You know what I'm saying? Like,
did they really just get thirsty?
Yeah, well, what is that? Thirsty with no water around, or they were just some inverted mind state, or like what was it?
It's actually good.
Yeah, like I'm gonna milk that cow. You know, like what made them the first? I've been thinking about stuff like that. What made them try that in the first place? Like what made them make some butter? You know, no. We'll go to the next video here. I mean,
shoot, man, you survived that many assassination attempts.
Yeah, and lived till he was 90 years old.
Man, old man.
Yo, so that is one of the craziest ways they try to kill this man. Like it was like one of them through a milkshake. But here's some other ways they try to kill off Fidel Castro.
According to Fidel Castro's former Secret Service chief, the now-deceased dictator survived no less than 634 attempts on his life, many by the American Central Intelligence Agency. From exploding cigars to exploding seashells, what were some of the most creative ways the United States tried to kill Castro? Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Infographics Show. Today, we're taking a look at the U.S.'s most insane attempts to kill Fidel Castro. As a ruler of Cuba from 1961 until 2011, Fidel Castro came to power riding a wave of revolutionary zeal. But while
trust me, it gets more interesting.
Right. I mean, they must have binge watched a bunch of Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah.
And they were like, we're gonna use these.
It's the fact that this imagine a group of white men in these boardrooms spend some serious money and resources to pull this off.
Man, why is it? I just imagine the boardroom meeting and they have a big old board and they put the U.S. as Wile E. Coyote and they got the Road Runner with the same hat as Castro.
I want to see who the guy is like. No, what about milkshakes? You know, and they're like, no, that's a good idea. You know, we're gonna run with that.
Or the exploding cigars.
Somebody had to approve that. You know.
What about an anvil dropping from the sky?
And they're like, how much would they cost us? You know, that's crazy.
While having his roots as an anti-imperialistic revolutionary that fought for the people, upon assuming power, Castro very quickly became as ruthless and authoritarian as any dictator. From stripping away the freedom of the press to bragging about jailing tens of thousands of political opponents, Castro became one of the most notorious leaders of the 20th century. Yet it wasn't until Castro began cozying up to the U.S.'s archenemy, the Soviet Union, that he wandered into the crosshairs of the U.S.'s Central Intelligence Agency, fearful of a global domino effect.
And that's what they're saying in this video. But as we see, the Bay of Pigs got him salty.
Yep, they need revenge.
Right.
Effect, where one nation falling into communism would lead to another, and so on. The U.S. was also deeply disturbed by the presence of a strong Soviet ally less than 100 miles from its shores. Foreseeing a Cuban crisis scenario, which ironically would come to pass anyways, the U.S. Intelligence Committee made the recommendation that Castro be removed from power by any means necessary. For a decade and a half, U.S. presidents would agree, until the signing of Executive Order 11905 by President Gerald R. Ford in 1976 banned U.S. intelligence agencies from committing political assassinations.
No, you really don't hear anything about the President Ford.
Man, that's exactly what I thought. When
you hear about Carter, you hear about Nixon, you hear about Kennedy, but when the last time you heard something about President Ford or what he's done for a legacy? You really don't hear about him.
Man, at all.
Yeah.
I was like, dang, man. There was a President Ford.
Right.
Yet for 15 long years prior to Executive Order 11905, it was open season on Castro as far as the U.S. was concerned, even going so far as to enlist the aid of American mafia leaders. So what were some of the craziest ways the CIA tried to kill Castro? Perhaps the most famous plots against Castro was the exploding cigar. Known for his love of cigars, the CIA brainstormed a way to get Castro a case of cigars cigars loaded with small amounts of explosives. Allegedly, during a trip to the United Nations in 1966, a CIA agent was en route to swap a case of explosive cigars with real cigars, when at the last minute the operation was canceled for fear of political fallout from Castro's assassination taking place during a visit to the UN. Yet, some sources suggest that the exploding cigar ploy was a complete fabrication, purposefully silly and meant to hide more serious attempts on Castro's life. Whatever the case, Castro's security team took the threat extremely seriously, eventually leading them to create the Cohiba cigar brand in order to guarantee the safety of Castro's supply of cigars. When Castro threw out the Batista regime in 1959 and took over the extremely lucrative casinos and hotels, he made more than a few enemies among international mobsters, enemies the CIA was happy to cooperate with against their shared enemy. Shortly after Castro came to power, a CIA agent met with Las Vegas mobster Johnny Roselli, who introduced him to members of the Las Vegas syndicate of Bugsy Siegel fame, offering the mobsters $150,000, or $1.2 million in today's dollars, to kill Castro in whatever way they thought was best. Roselli declined the money and said he'd do the job for free. Contacting mob operatives in Cuba, the Vegas mob attempted to poison Castro with cyanide pills loaded into his drinks. Yet the mob assassin failed several times throughout 1960 to get close enough to Castro to succeed. After the multiple failures, the CIA ran out of patience and turned the job over to a doctor named Anthony Verona, who, due to professional connections, had a much better chance of getting close to the ever more wary dictator. Yet, even after being paid $11,000 or $93,000 in today's dollars, Verona quit after the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. Poison pills seemed like a good idea to the CIA though, and shortly after the mob failed, the CIA launched Operation Mongoose with the goal of recruiting and training Cuban exiles to become secret agents inside Cuba. In what would have seemed to be the absolute jackpot for the CIA, agents managed to recruit one of Castro's former girlfriends, a woman named Marita Lorenz. With overnight access to his home, Marita seemed like a sure bet, and the CIA quickly began training her in the use of cyanide tablets. Lethal within 30 seconds of ingestion, Marita returned to Cuba and reconnected with Castro, staying the night at his home. Yet as she went for the pills, she realized they had dissolved into the jar of cold cream she stored them in and were completely unusable. Suffering a crisis of conscience, or perhaps afraid because of Castro's suspicions, Marita confessed the plot to Castro, who immediately began to rage, yet not against Marita, but against the US. Per a 1993 interview with Vanity Fair, Castro then grabbed a .45 caliber pistol and put it in her hands, telling her that she couldn't kill him. He was right. Marita dropped the gun and stayed the night with Castro, leaving in the morning and never returning. Despite repeated failures, the CIA is nothing if not persistent. Once more going back to the drawing board, they struck upon another of Castro's weaknesses, his love of taking frequent morning ocean swims. Well known for attending a private beach for his swims, the CIA came upon the idea of infiltrating that beach with US Special Forces the night before and placing sabotaged seashells along the sand. Each seashell would conceal a small amount of explosives, and exploding them all together would hopefully neutralize the dictator no matter where he chose to sunbathe. The idea garnered enough serious attention that tests were conducted on a Virginia beach. But lacking in explosive power, the entire idea was deemed completely impractical. Yet undeterred, the CIA came upon another seashell idea. What if instead of numerous seashells, just one big one? With Castro's known love of scuba diving, the CIA proposed painting one large seashell in exotic colors and hiding explosives within. Luring Castro's attention, the seashell could then be remotely...
What the hell? What were they smoking in that room?
And they actually went as far as doing a test run
in Virginia Beach. Man, for them to have the small seashells and be like, you know what? What if we a big one, big exotic looking one, and Castro's gonna swim towards it?
And yeah, and you got to. These weren't the overnight ideas. Like
no, they set on these.
Yeah, so even the one about the seashell, they probably spent months trying to perfect this thing. This to say it wasn't gonna work.
Right.
Yeah. How much money? Yeah, right. How much money, our tax dollars went into this?
Man,
they didn't even do the job.
Right. It didn't even work. Man, people are paying taxes for this.
Yeah, man, that was just crazy.
detonated when he came close enough. Ultimately, this idea was also regarded as impractical, with no guarantee Castro would notice this particular seashell amongst the thousands littered.
I was going to make a note, man. Like Fidel didn't give a damn about America. Like, why you keep messing with this dude?
Man, the dude, man,
he mind his own business. He trying to run his country, and he keep effing with him, bro.
And the fact that they kept messing with him led to him going to Russia and be like, "Hey, look, I wouldn't mind having some missiles for these."
Now have a common enemy now.
Right, exactly.
During Cuba's beaches, they say the pen is mightier than the sword, but could it potentially be lethal? American novelist Ernest Hemingway had owned property in Cuba since 1940 and spent most of his time there until his death in 1961. Shortly after Hemingway's suicide, his widow floated.
God dang, he was only 21 years old.
Damn, man, right?
I don't know why I thought Hemingway lived a lot long. Oh, he committed suicide. Man, that's crazy.
That young, being an author that young. Owning property in Cuba.
Floated the idea of using the farm as a staging ground to kill Castro. As a huge fan of Hemingway's work, Castro had already visited what had become a shrine to the late author, with his widow noting that Castro seemed to have little security with him when he visited. The CIA carefully considered the offer, and despite the apparent advantages it offered, ultimately rejected the idea. While no official reason was given, perhaps the CIA feared, rightfully so, the backlash of using the home of one of the most acclaimed novelists of the 20th century to commit an assassination. From exploding cigars to seashells to poisoned pills and former lovers, the CIA clearly has no shortage of imagination when it comes to nefarious plots. Yet Castro would go on to defy every attempt made on his life and ultimately pass away of old age, in a way defeating his former rivals at the most powerful intelligence agency in the world.
Man, 630, between 634 and 638.
Yeah. And this is a few of the ways.
This is
no matter how deep they went to kill this man.
Right. These are the ones that stood out. These are probably the ones that are unclassified.
Right. Yeah. and then I'm thinking like these not like he dies the CIA for 638 times. He said 638. That's just the CIA. They're not including all the rebels internally. They try to murder him.
Right. And the other branches of the U.S. that try to get him as well.
Oh, okay, he wasn't 21 when he died. That's how long he lived there. Okay, he lived in Cuba until he was 21.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I thought it was older than that. Okay, that makes more sense. All right, more ways to try to kill Castro.
Fidel Castro, the former El Presidente of Cuba, has survived more attempts on his life than Rasputin. In fact, the chief of Cuba's counterintelligence, Fabian Escalante, estimated the number of assassination attempts at a staggering 638. And that's just from the CIA. Since the 1960s, the CIA had been after Castro like a coyote trying to catch a roadrunner. In fact, most of their plans sounded like they came straight out of the Acme Handbook. For example, the CIA knew Castro loved to scuba dive, so they planned on filling a beautiful shell with explosives and detonating it when Castro swam by to take a look. That one was discarded for being too far-fetched, but the guys at the CIA had several more up their sleeves. At different times, they attempted to poison Castro's milkshakes, his face cream, and his handkerchief. They even hatched a plan to make his beard fall out so people wouldn't take him seriously. And there was the now notorious scheme to send him a box of exploding cigars, as if smoking weren't harmful enough. Despite all the effort the CIA put into killing Castro, the man still outlasted 10 U.S. presidents before stepping down due to health issues in 2008.
Right, USS Enterprise. Crazy.
Man, I mean, this is our government, man.
Right.
This is our government.
Oh.
Did you have the one about
Yeah, we have to get some more. The next one here. Oh, no. This is high to have to survive. Hey, we have to be quiet. Keep that one.
Yeah.
But this one from the sister. Speaking about
that's what I want to get into.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Ma. Let's keep to the one about the Baltimore woman.
Our complete coverage continues now. Alex Dimitrick is live with a very different sort of remembrance of Fidel Castro. Alex?
Well, Jessica, it's a story of a love affair with a dash of espionage. On this quiet Baltimore street of historic homes, a family's history is revealed.
He was her first love.
According to Valerie Lorenz, he was Fidel Castro, and in 1959, just after the Cuban Revolution, Castro boarded a cruise ship captained by her father. Also on board was her 19-year-old sister, Marita Lorenz, who told Castro,
"Well, you can't come up here with your guns." So they took off her guns, and she looked at him and said, "You too." Challenging. Marita was always challenging.
Valerie Lorenz says that challenge quickly developed into a love affair that stretched over 2 years.
Very kind, very gentle man. We see him as this vicious, flamboyant dictator, and all he wanted was the best of his country.
But with Soviet support, communism became the new direction, and Marita's relationship allegedly led to her recruitment by the CIA into an assassination plot.
With a poison pill in a jar of cream, in true CIA fashion, the pill melted. She was obviously in his apartment, and he said, "You will never kill me." And she said, "You're right. I love you. I could never kill you."
Valerie Lorenz says her sister learned of Castro's death on television in her New York home.
Oh, she went hysterical. You know, grief-stricken, totally grief-stricken.
Even at
he
that old.
was her first love.
Wow, that's crazy.
Marita Lorenz is 77 years old. WJZ.
And now about to get into the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
And how close we really were about to go into a nuclear war with them. And like I said, man, you can tell stuff was going on. Like, you can tell how serious it was, because I know I mentioned this before.
Yeah.
You know, in my high school, well, before they got the new building, I was there when they had the old building.
Yeah.
And, you know, they had a nuclear bomb shelter in my high school.
Dang,
in the basement. And for the longest time, you know, I was a kid. I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. But, you know, I remember seeing the nuclear sign, Raptor sign thing on there. And I didn't know what to think of it. But, you know, until later, like, damn, like, we had a bomb shelter in the damn school.
Man, they used to have PSAs that they would play in classes about if a nuclear bomb goes off, you know, you duck and cover. Even though that wouldn't help.
Right, that wouldn't have done nothing.
You're going to go into your desk after a nuclear bomb.
You know, they definitely, like, every national disaster in school, you had to go under your desk damn near. Like, I think the only one was, like, a tornado, you had to be tucked it in the hallway.
Yeah.
But either way, it's like, yeah, that's really going to help you.
I mean, of all the places, you're going to go get in the hallway. The tornado rips through the school. I just think it like certain drills are made to make people feel good.
You know, I mean, when Dave Chappelle said they had like the drills for the mass shooters.
Yeah. And
he's like, how stupid is that? Because the mass shooter going to be in the same damn drill.
He knows all the hiding spaces.
Like, man, yeah, they don't know, man. Public school system, you gotta love it, right?
Boy, you got to.
You know, the next video here.
It's not hard to imagine a world where at any given moment, you and everyone you know could be wiped out without warning at the push of a button. This was the reality for millions of people during the 45-year period after World War II, now known as the Cold War. As the United States and Soviet Union faced off across the globe, each knew that the other had nuclear weapons capable of destroying it. And destruction never loomed closer than during the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1961, the U.S. unsuccessfully tried to overthrow Cuba's new communist government. That failed attempt was known as the Bay of Pigs, and it convinced Cuba to seek help from the USSR. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was happy to comply by secretly deploying nuclear missiles to Cuba, not only to protect the island, but to counteract the threat from U.S.
I know what you mentioned, man. Like, Russia had a big influence over Russia. Like, you know, like, so when I went over there a few years ago, and it was some parts of Havana that you see the Spanish influence,
right,
and you keep walking deeper into the city, and all of a sudden, even the architecture, it looked completely Russian.
What?
Like, completely, and it was still intact to this day. You know, like even some of the cars they drove, some of them came from. Can you remember they had the embargo, so you couldn't get stuff from America, so they had to get stuff from elsewhere. So you either had the old school American cars that had since like the 50s,
right,
or you had like some of the newer cars that came from Russia, because Russia had access to some of that stuff.
Man, that's wild.
Yeah, and then like all over the island, you still see the Spanish cannons they left there, the iron cannons.
Yeah,
it was just dumped all over the island. Cause, I mean, but these were like heavier than cast iron. Like these was they're big and heavy. So of course they didn't want to take them when they left. They're like F it, so they left it all there.
Right.
And so I mean, in some parts of the city, like man, it was so scattered. I'm talking about it'd be randomly placed in the streets, like to this day. And
People walk
sometimes
around it.
they just walk around it. You know what I mean? 'Cause it's just so big and heavy. Like they know what to do with it.
Right.
Like, and I think certain streets they use it as like a roadblock. You know, like
Man, that is insane.
Yeah,
man.
this is crazy. But the thing they had that many cannons on a small little bitty island.
Right.
We have to think about it, like I said, it's hard to carry, hard to move by ship. You know what I'm saying? So like, yo, we ain't taking this. Like we just gonna leave if they can have it.
Man,
you
imagine
know?
all the power
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
in those cannons, man.
Yeah, like it was kind of scary to see, but it was interesting to see like some of these buildings. How you see like a Cuban building and then a
Yeah.
Russian building like right across from it, total different structure,
Right.
differently built. Man, this show how influence.
One has Spanish infrastructure, the other one has Russian.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, coming back to America, it just make America look so boring because most of America came from Europe. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like we really don't have it. I mean, even our name is like Birmingham, Europe. You know what I mean?
Right, for England.
New England.
Right.
You know, you know what I'm saying? Like it's no imagination, man.
I mean, England didn't have much flair in the first.
They blame
compared to Russia and
like
Spain.
like chicken and no seasoning, basically.
Man, English food is no. I mean, no offense to our English viewers out there, but if you're a realist, you know English food is
Compared
known
to
for
other
being
places,
terrible.
yeah, especially compared to the rest of the world,
Right.
man.
U.S. missiles in Italy and Turkey.
All right, pause that right there.
By the time U.S. intelligence discovered
Now you see the hypocrisy of the U.S. because the Russians put missiles in Cuba. Whoa, what are you guys doing? They have missiles in Italy and Turkey, pointing at Russia.
Thing.
Right.
So what's wrong with them? We're trying to fit themselves.
So that's like somebody has two straps and they're pointing at you, and you pull out a shotgun. They're like, "Bro, what are you doing?"
Like you just supposed to sit there unarmed.
Right.
Right. Going out.
the plan, the materials to create the missiles were already in place. At an emergency meeting on October 16, 1962, military advisors urged an airstrike on missile sites and invasion of the island. But President John F. Kennedy chose a more careful approach. On October 22nd, he announced that the U.S. Navy would intercept all shipments to Cuba. There was just one problem. A naval blockade was considered an act of war. Although the president called it a quarantine that did not block basic necessities, the Soviets didn't appreciate the distinction. In an outraged letter to Kennedy, Khrushchev wrote, "The violation of freedom to use international waters and international airspace is an act of aggression which pushes mankind toward the abyss of world nuclear missile war." Thus ensued.
I mean, seriously, this is international waters. This isn't the U.S.'s territory to control.
Right.
So how can you quarantine waters that aren't yours?
Just the wording of it. So like somebody actually thought they're gonna fly.
Man,
it was the quarantine. Russia should be cool with it. Come on now.
The most intense 6 days of the Cold War. While the U.S. demanded the removal of the missiles, Cuba and the USSR insisted they were only defensive. And as the weapons continued to be armed, the U.S. prepared for a possible invasion. On October 27th, a spy plane piloted by Major Rudolf Anderson was shot down by a Soviet missile. The same day, a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine was hit by a small depth charge from a U.S. Navy vessel trying to signal it to come up. The commanders on the sub, too deep to communicate with the surface, thought war had begun and prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. That decision had to be made unanimously by 3 officers. The captain and political officer both authorized the launch, but Vasily Arkhipov, second in command, refused. His decision saved the day, and perhaps the world.
Man.
But the crisis wasn't over. For the first time in history, the U.S. military set itself to DEFCON 2, the defense readiness one step away from nuclear war. With hundreds of nuclear missiles ready to launch, the metaphorical doomsday clock stood at 1 minute to midnight. But diplomacy carried on. In Washington, D.C., Attorney General Robert Kennedy secretly met with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. After intense negotiation, they reached the following proposal. The U.S. would remove their missiles from Turkey and Italy and promise to never invade Cuba in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal from Cuba under UN inspection. Once the meeting had concluded, Dobrynin cabled Moscow, saying time is of the essence and we shouldn't miss the chance. And at 9 a.m. the next day, a message arrived from Khrushchev announcing the Soviet missiles would be removed from Cuba. The crisis was now over. While
So you see the power of, if there's an issue, you have a conversation. You have a conversation with the goal of peace.
Yeah. Yeah. They prevent the war.
Right.
Yeah, that's all it took.
Criticized at the time by their respective governments for bargaining with the enemy, contemporary historical analysis shows great admiration for Kennedy and Khrushchev's ability to diplomatically solve the crisis. But the disturbing lesson was that a slight communication error or split-second decision by a commander could have thwarted all their efforts, as it nearly did, if not for Vasily Arkhipov's courageous choice. The Cuban Missile Crisis revealed just how fragile human politics are compared to the terrifying power they can unleash.
And it's crazy that people were upset with Robert Kennedy for bargaining with the enemy. Like, what else do you want?
Then you'd be mad. It'd be a whole nuclear war taking you out. Like,
So you're not supposed to bargain, but then when the half of the U.S. is in smithereens, you want to be upset.
Right,
You see how you can't win with certain people.
Yeah. Like, you damn if you do, damn if you don't. Yeah. That he wanted to stay in power, that he didn't want to deal with the U.S. I didn't really like the way he worded that, because like if you
not dealing with another foreign nation makes you a tyrant.
Right. Foreign nation had malintentions for you.
Right. Foreign nation that tried to kill you.
Right. And you mad he want to be friends with him, and they tried to kill me over 600 times.
Right.
Like, come on now, bro.
Man, but you see when people don't get their way.
Yeah, by any means necessary.
Right.
Like you say, they kept attacking him, and he was just trying to mind his business and do his job.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that last video we had for tonight, man. I appreciate y'all hanging tough with us tonight. Sorry for inconvenience.
Yes.
We probably gonna be on the channel for the next 3 shows, I think. Hopefully won't be that long. It depends. So we hear back from YouTube. We'll be even better prepared. Like I say, man, we only had 30 minutes to switch everything over to this other channel. So it'll be a lot better next time, as far as we put a lot of time into our production, as you can tell from past shows.
Right, we try.
So we will do the same thing, be on this channel. So now we know we have a fully functional backup when things like this happens.
Exactly.
And it's probably going to happen again, because like lots of that we cover are controversial issues and that YouTube don't like us talking about,
Right.
And not just us, but other pro-black channels also been affected, like I said, for the past few months. So we got to be prepared for these things. So we definitely will be. But we enjoyed y'all. I hope y'all learned something that we did while putting this together.
Castro was a very interesting character.
Yeah, it's like, you're not saying he's good or bad. There's some good history and a good story.
Right.
And and it's good to have a different viewpoint, because this, from the American viewpoint, all they say, Castro is evil.
Right.
But Cuba also have like some of the highest literacy rates, some of the best healthcare.
Right. A lot of doctors in the Latin American world come from Cuba.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where, the whole communism thing is a bit much, but you could tell that Castro did love his country.
But who would say capitalism is even better? I mean, hell, we enslaved here.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, are we better just because we have internet and a couple other vanity things? I mean,
right, things that distract you.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So like who to say which form of government better than the other? Because they're both flawed. Exactly. Communism and democracy, is really a republic. So there's a lot to consider. But like I said again, we appreciate y'all hanging tight with us.
Oh yes.
It's gonna be better even the next show next week, because now you give us the weekend
right
to really tighten things up. So, and we will. But I hope you have a great one. If you haven't already joined our Discord, just for moments like this, we was able to announce on Discord that we were switching to a new channel, and also our website, theblacknarrative.tv. We also try to have the latest stream on there as well,
right?
Just in case something like this happens. So. Because we have this second channel on YouTube, we have a Twitch, so we try to have multiple platforms to switch on.
Get our information out.
Yeah, trying to get it out, because we put a lot of time putting these shows together and topics. And but definitely leave a comment. And even tonight's show, my plan is to have this on the original Black Narrative channel.
Right, so you can go back and watch it there.
Yeah, so we're gonna have that going too. So anyway, you anything else you want to add?
No, just stay vigilant.
All right, man. Well, y'all have a good one and have a good night. Shalom.
Shalom, y'all. Good night.